Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Winter Solstice question and answer live stream. Thank you all for coming. And you can post some questions in this chat box over here on the side of the screen. But we've already received some questions for this event, so we're going to start with those first. And the first one is from Laura. And she says, rounds of incarnations. What characterizes them? How long can they take? And what may they look like? Am I understanding correctly that the first round is about liberation of the self from suffering? And then the next round is about liberating others here and then in other worlds also. Yeah, it's a long, long journey. It's a much longer story than anyone's ever told us about all this. And the way it starts off is we start right here and we go through these different levels of consciousness. We start at the instinctive and go all the way to the self superconscious. But during that time, the goal is the same for everybody. It's the Prodigal Son story. We've come out, we've entered into incarnation. We're getting our experiences. We're learning what's valuable, what's true. And we are becoming more and more self-realized. So basically, as we start to wake up, we could become more and more conscious till we reach the point of self-realization. Now, theoretically, at this point, anyone's free to go on to beyond this world of incarnation and suffering, but they never do. Nobody ever does, because by the time you get there, it's like you think of everybody else that on Earth, let's say, as like your most beloved child, and they're caught in a room that's on fire, and you wouldn't leave your child in a room on fire. So these self-realized ones, when they make it there, they just turn around and come back in because they don't want to leave anybody behind. And they stay here until the whole planet becomes self-realized. And then there are further missions out into the universes after that. This is what the extraterrestrials are doing. They're making journeys into the outer universe to help us, to help other people who are trying to raise their consciousness. And they do it by creating questions. We see these strange phenomena. How is that possible? How can a ship go 200,000 kilometers in the air? How can it make an immediate right-hand turn? So it's creating questions in our mind to help us open up that, first of all, we're not alone. It's ridiculous to think that we are alone because of all the planets out there. There are more suns than there are grains of sand on Earth. And around those suns, there are many, many planets. So just in our galaxy alone, they estimate there's probably something like 40 billion planets that could support life like us. And there's definitely 11 billion planets right in that sweet spot, right close to the sun like we are. Not too close, but not too far away. So for sure, there's life out there. And the extraterrestrials are just trying to wake us up that there's much more to life than we've imagined so far.
Until we reach that level, first we start to incarnate at the instinct level. That's the first cycle. And there's a second cycle. We try to, using thought and emotion, we try to develop our psychonoetical body. We start to live subconsciously and gradually consciously building up our psychonoetical body steadily. Most of us are in this second cycle. And in the third cycle, we start to use what is called the super senses and develop these abilities. And in the fourth cycle, we more and more develop these super senses and use these senses super consciously. And at the end of the fourth cycle, we master 4 elements, and we master what we call start to use attunement. And at the end of the fourth cycle, we self-realize. That's a personality level. And the fifth cycle will come back as an invisible helper and develop like that way.
So after we've reached this high level, it's become self-realized, the planet becomes self-realized, and now we're sent out as extraterrestrial intelligences to help others who are developing too, to raise their awareness, to ask the deep questions and start to really think about the nature of life. How long does that last? It lasts so long. You can't imagine how long all this lasts. And then when they're done with that phase and they've done their work assigned to them by life itself, what happens? Do they get to go back to the Godhead? No, they start on another round where they go to other planets and live on those planets to help others raise their consciousness. And it's not until that's completed do they take their liberation. But even after that, they still can come back as dominions and special incarnations. We have a question here from Bertold on the composition of our personality lesson we just had. Thank you for this lesson, very valuable one. Even after reading and practicing on the matter, I have a question. Could one know what the divine plan is for one during this current incarnation? And if yes, how? Well, overall, the divine plan is the same for everybody in the big picture. And that is to learn to love everybody. And we are starting, the whole story is the Prodigal Son story. You go out away from God, you incarnate, you suffer, you realize, gee, I'm making mistakes. I wasted my mind energy. I wasted my inheritance on these foolish things. Now I'm hungry. I want to go back to where I came from. I want to go back to God. And so you start off. So we're all on that journey someplace. Now the Prodigal Son goes out and he just dives into matter, into material living with drinking and gambling and loose women and all this stuff. And then the famine comes and he loses his money. And he realized, I've been wasting my money on these unvaluable things. So where are you? The question is, where are you? You have to do this analyzation, where you are in this cycle of the Prodigal Son. Are you just entering matter? Are you chasing wealth for the illusionary entrapment that it brings us sometimes? Or have you realized, oh, really, I've made some mistakes. I want to go back to God. I want to go back to God. And of course, as soon as he thinks that, the Prodigal Son starts off to see God, and God sees him coming from a long way off and runs and kisses him on the neck and embraces him. Well, that just means God's expecting us. He knows we're coming. It's just that we've been entangled in our pursuit of matter. We've run out of our house. We've lost our way. We forgot who we are. We don't even know how to get home. That's what the spiritual process is about. It's to wake us up to what really is happening, not what we imagine is happening or we want to happen, but what's really happening in our lives. And so we have to make that analysis. Now, having said all that, each individual incarnation has a certain number of slated life lessons for us. And those will be a little different for everybody. Everybody has to go through all these life lessons and get all these things. And they can be compared to the stations of the cross of Christ. But you have to decide and find out where you are now. And that's done by simply introspection and observing. Then you can know, gee, well, I've come here to raise, I've come here and I'm not supposed to just make myself a slave to matter, keep borrowing more and more money and buy more and more things. That's a slave. That's a debt slave, really. And the world is full of us. We're all debt slaves to some degree. So we have to decide what is our lesson in this cycle of coming out and going back to God. Okay, here's Stephen. When a human pregnancy is aborted, either naturally or via the elected medical process, is the incarnation completely canceled or rescheduled for later, so to speak? Or does it only the gross material body of the fetus that never fully is formed? And so the baby grows up and lives only in the higher worlds of the fourth and fifth dimension, expressing the self in his psychical and then noetical bodies until the next incarnation. He asked more, but I'm going to stop with that one and answer that first. The decision for incarnation is done by the inner self along with the lords of karma, the archangels, who help prepare a body for that incarnation based on what the lessons to be learned are. and what the lessons maybe haven't been learned in the previous lifetime. So if a child gets aborted, you can't say it's all one way. It depends on the particulars of everybody's circumstances who are involved in this story. But for example, when someone comes and the parents say, oh, I'm not ready, I can't take care of a kid, and so they abort. What happens to the kid? Well, he stays on the psychical world, but he doesn't go away. He's been allowed and scheduled to incarnate with these parents. So he hangs around, and maybe some years later, there's an opportunity and he comes in again. There's some that I've heard, I haven't tested this myself, but like 6 times. The abortion will happen 6 times or 5 times, and that child will still eventually manage to incarnate with those parents. Now, if a parent's they abort every time, well, obviously that child isn't going to get in there. But it doesn't mean his right to incarnate, his obligation to incarnate has been removed. So what happens is the Lords of Karma try to find another set of parents that have similar lessons to be learned and lessons to give with the child. And the Dascos describes it like this. He says it's like you take a big colander. A colander is a big metal bowl with holes in it. But he says they're holes of different size. And then you put different marbles in it of different size, and you shake it. And you shake and shake until one of those marbles finds its size hole, and it goes out. So that's just a symbolic way of just telling you that the incarnating person representing the ball and the parents representing the hole, they have to have a match. They have to be appropriate for each other so that each of them can get the lessons and give the lessons they need to in this incarnation. And again, all that's been decided by the inner self of both the incarnating child and the parents, way before any of them were born. So the trouble is personalities, we disconnect from that inner self, so we don't remember it, of course. But and sometimes the free will is so strong. It's such a respected thing in human beings that they can override the divine plan temporarily, not forever, but for a moment.
Yes, but it doesn't mean abortion. We can do abortion freely at our will. It doesn't mean so. Certain circumstances doesn't allow us to give the birth of a child. Sometimes it happens, but when we do so, each time we create our own karmas, which we will need to reap ahead. So please remember, the child, the spirit soul of a child is waiting the opportunity, but it doesn't mean we can do whatever we wish. Divine law always work on us perfectly.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's an important point.